Let's get into Ukraine. I mean, and
Sure.
drawing all of your experiences to get your perceptions. So, we have Trump coming into office, and everyone expects that there's going to be some sort of negotiations or agreement or some sort of a freezing of the conflict or peace agreement. I mean, different words have been thrown around. Um, Whatever the scenario is that plays out, the question that's really important for Ukraine is how do we hold Russia accountable? What is a fair agreement of going forward? Look, or an end to the war. Look for you like for Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
And we hear a lot of these times, oh, Russia committed a war crime. This is a war crime. I mean, probably every week or you read somewhere someone mentioning this war crime, and you know my feeling is always like, well, what does that mean? Russia doesn't care that it's a war crime. So like why do people like keep insisting, oh, it's a war crime, like as if something is that's going to mean something, but it must mean something in some context. And sort of like I'd like to get your thoughts to flesh that out. Like, how do we hold Russia accountable? What is a war crime? Isn't war itself a crime? How do we get a justice and a fair resolution for Ukraine, but by holding Russia accountable for its actions?
Great questions, great comments. Um, what's a war crime? I mean, I'm not an expert on international war crimes. I'm going to start out, so I'm not going to be able to give you a full answer there, but I'll give you a fairly reasonable one, I hope. It follows during past conflicts, the nation states got together and decided there's got to be some sort of a rule-based way to conduct war. And they put together the Geneva Conventions, which defined what are war crimes, what are not war crimes. And the essence of it is that it's fair. Indiscriminate violence is not fair. People who are on the side, civilians leading their day-to-day lives, are not legitimate targets for criminal. I mean, they're not legitimate targets for warring parties to bring into the war, so to speak. So the essence of it is, if you're in a war and you're one of the nation states that's conducting a war, you should limit your battlefront to military targets that are legitimate in terms of defeating an opponent and minimizing the harm that is done to civilian life. That, in essence, is what we're after here in terms of talking about war crimes. And of course, there are things like genocides, which we are familiar with, where entire nations are wiped out, ethnic cleansing, things of that nature are war crimes, and plus genocide. But indiscriminate violence is, I would probably put that at the core of the definition of a war crime, where collateral damage is done to civilian populations when warring parties are trying to destroy each other. And now, the lines get vague because there's stamina involved. There's, how much dedication does a nation have to conducting and prosecuting a war? How do so Dresden, for example, where an entire city was wiped out in bombings, was a war crime in World War II. But part of the idea is you have to break the back and the stamina of your opponent to win a war. So the question is, what can you do short of committing war crimes to break the back of a country's support for conducting a war? And these are things that, I mean, there are experts who travel with warring divisions and parts of military, and these lawyers are consulted on, is what we're doing here a war crime or not? If it is, we can't do it. If it is, we can do it. Such as, for example, using drones and causing collateral damage. An example might be the Israeli attack on the in Lebanon, and getting some of the leaders of Hezbollah, bombing a Hezbollah leader, and how much collateral damage might be involved. So there are lawyers who specialize in that area, and they define what is and what is not a war crime. And a properly conducted war would involve lawyers being consulted on major military matters as they're conducted. That's about the best I can give you in a short version of what's a war crime.
Well, I think we're both sure that Russia does not have these lawyers, and in fact, their strategy is to target the civilian life of Ukraine, to try to break the back of Ukraine and
Yeah.
get them to submit, and to indiscriminately target electrical infrastructure, civilian infrastructure. In my last podcast, I had photographer Sasha Maslov talking about how they had instructions to decimate Mariupol just for the image of destruction, that if you resist, this is what's going to happen to your city.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's part and parcel of their war philosophy, is to just, you know, cause this sort of damage. So, you know, if they don't care, if this is like, how do we, or the world, or how does it work following up like that, they torture people, people are raped, prisoners are maybe shot or beheaded, or I mean, the list goes on and on. you know how do we move
Well,
forward if they disregard this world order, right? This Geneva Convention means nothing to them, right? So how do we hold them accountable, or how does the world hold them accountable? What happens? How can there be a resolution for Ukraine potentially?
well, okay. Big question.
Yeah.
And you have to dance a little around these questions because I don't think there are any exact answers to them. But let me say this. I mean, historically speaking, life used to be, Genghis Khan times and so on. I mean, the horde would come along and slaughter everybody in a village, in a city, and take over, take the women, and marry or whatever the women, and life would go on. That was a kind of a natural sort of state of affairs. But in what we consider to be the civilized world, after 30 million deaths in World War I and another 50 million deaths in World War II, we came to our senses, supposedly, at least in Europe, and reached a number of, well, worldwide, we came to our senses, and we reached agreement on the way we should conduct ourselves, and we created the United Nations. First the League, which didn't work, and then the United Nations after World War II, which has been working for the last 75 years. And so there's the rules-based order, which is generally referred to as, civilized behavior in warfare and elsewhere, in the conduct of nations. But then there's countries, nations like Russia, and it's not the only one. And we, like, maybe philosophically, we differ with the Eastern, perhaps, view of things. Like Russia would say, we're the ones that are violating the international rules that exist. But from the point of view of a lawyer from the West, shall we say, which is what I am, the United Nations Charter calls on nations to respect each other's border. And there's a whole series of agreements. And getting into the earlier question that you posed about how to keep Russia accountable for what's going on, I have a list right now of 20 previous agreements that have been reached with Russia or its predecessor, the USSR, uh, in which the whole issue of respect for borders, sovereignty, human rights, and so on were agreed to. And there are covenants, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and other instruments, international instruments, that supposedly govern the behavior of states where they've agreed to a certain conduct, but unfortunately they don't comply. They don't respect the covenants. In the case of Ukraine in particular, apart from the UN Charter, the big agreement was the Budapest Accord, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with it, but just to briefly comment on it. Ukraine, Russia, the United States, China, the UK, and France all agreed in this Budapest Accord. And at the time, this is in 1994, following the breakup of the Soviet Union, Ukraine ended up with the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world, involving both strategic and tactical nuclear weapons. And the question is, well, what are we going to do about this? Should Ukraine keep these weapons or whatever? And the United States, Clinton in particular, was very anxious to relieve Ukraine of its nuclear arsenal. And an agreement was reached in which that arsenal was sent to Russia in exchange for guarantees for Ukraine to protect its sovereignty and independence as the cost of surrendering the nuclear arsenal. Well, we know today that Russia has not complied with that agreement. The one good thing about the agreement is we can use it as an argument in the United States, in the UK, etc., as a reason why they need to be supportive of Ukraine. I think that's the strongest argument that we can put forward to the United States, that Ukraine is not a charitable case where we have to give our money to them because, they're involved in a war, but rather because there was the threat of nuclear war and Ukraine surrendered its nuclear arsenal for the sake of securing peace for itself and hopefully for Europe in that context, but regretfully, Russia has not complied with it. The question about accountability is war. This war is accountability. That's what this war is all about. It's not about signing a new agreement to have Russia, stop. We're trying to keep Russia accountable according to the agreements that have already been made.